Kate, the floor is yours, Jude.
Hi, I'm Jude. I am Mi'kmaq. I would like to acknowledge that we are on stolen Mi'kmaq and ancestral Beothic land. I'm not really sure what land acknowledgements serve to do in this modern day world. And honestly, I would just like to say that I would like to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, but then I would like to see some action on the fact that we are on stolen land. And I'm really excited for the talk tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Alalia.
Thanks, Jude.
Hey, hello everyone. How are you? How is everyone doing? Good. My name is Yohei. I use he, him, and I'm part of the community-based research center. I work for this organization with Charlie. Community-based research center is a nationwide organization that promotes the health of 2S LGBTQAI+ population through research and intervention development. And this pivot initially started as a 4-day in-person workshop. However, as you may know, the pandemic hit and it went into an online series. And this Sex at the Kitchen Table is a result of the first series that they had and had a discussion and talked about what is needed in the community. And the idea is that we need a space where we can talk about sexual health without having too much judgment and also too formal setting that we can have talks about sexual health like we are chatting with friends. So that's why we are gathering here today. And I will pass on to Charlie so that Charlie can talk about Quadrangle.
Sure. So Quadrangle is in partnership with this series. As Yohei mentioned, it's all about talking about sexual health, but in a more laid back, friend-to-friend kind of conversation. And the reason why we've partnered with Quadrangle is Newfoundland Labrador's official charity, trying to get a community center and space for the members of our community in order to gather and communicate. And so we felt this was a great partnership. So that is why we're here today. And we're going to hand it over to Jen, who's going to give our presentation about our lovely talk tonight.
Thank you. I should have checked on this. Can you, Charlie, can you give me screen sharing ability so I can share the presentation? Sorry, I meant to do that before. I hope everybody's having a good Saturday. A couple of us were talking about how we're having a bit of a lazy Saturday. So for anybody who's joining, you're in good company because I think we're all feeling sleepy today. Okay, so for anybody who hasn't been to any of the webinars previously, as Charlie and Yohei said, this has been a multi-series webinar. It's going to be 8 of them. There's still 2 more to go. But basically, like they said, we've been having discussions with people of kind of all over Canada, but people even outside of Canada, talking about sexual health in a way that is inclusive, casual, fun, and personal, public, everything. But it's been a really, really awesome experience. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, and our lovely speakers, which I'll get to in a second. So I do want to say a little note about privacy. By continuing to be in this webinar, you and other participants in the chat are consenting to be recorded, because we are recording this today. So if you don't wish to be identified, you can keep your camera off, keep your mic muted, and change your display name. So if you want to change it to like maybe a letter, or I don't know, so you can name your cat or something, but you can anonymize yourself if you choose to. And know that if you pose a question in the chat, your name, your ID will come up. So if you want to put in your cat's name, then, you know, that's fine. But you can be as anonymous as you'd like. You can ask questions in the chat, but there's also a Q&A function. It's up to you, whichever one you want to use. And you can also raise your hand or send a private message to the moderator, or which would be Charlie and Yohei or me. I do want to say that if you want to know more, you can visit zoom.us/privacy if you want to know more, or you can contact Charlie or Yohei or myself. We can get you some information. Yeah, so this is just a bit about the series of Mission Mandate. This is basically what we wanted to do, was just be get at the systemic root issues. Like today, I'm hoping we're going to talk a little about stigma, but inclusivity, about consent, all those things. I do want to say that the point of this series was to open conversations that aren't previously had or that aren't commonly had. But I do also want to say that by asking people to come speak about this, it can be really personal. And but if somebody's choosing to share a topic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they engage in that topic. Like if somebody wants to talk about, I don't know, I don't have an example in my brain right now, but if somebody's bringing up a topic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they engage with that topic, but it could as well. If somebody wants to share their personal experiences, then great, but they also don't have to. And I will say to the speakers, if you are going to talk about something that might traditionally need like a trigger warning or a bit of a consent warning, I ask that you maybe use those, because I know that kink and BDSM fetishes it's a super nuanced topic. There's a lot to unpack in there. It's a huge, gigantic, really complicated community and practice and sexual, like it's complicated. So while you're speaking about it, if you could offer a warning or just be yourself, but try and be thoughtful about maybe how you're speaking about topics. Yeah, I'd like everybody to introduce themselves. Maybe I'll get asked to go first, but I would like you to maybe tell us a little bit about why you're here today as well, because I know that we put out your bios, but I'd like to know why you were interested in talking about kink and BDSM and fetishes and why you wanted to join us today as well. So yeah, maybe Ask, you can hop in first, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
So my name is Ask. My pronouns are he and him. I'm here today because I just really love kink and BDSM, but it's also an important part of my life because I incorporate it into my work. And because it's such a big part of my life, I spend a lot of time researching things, and I also encounter a lot of ignorance about it, and I want to shift the narrative a bit and help people understand what it's maybe really like for me, or really like for some people if they want to share. So yeah, I think this is great. I'm really glad to be here.
Cool. Awesome. Nic, maybe you want to hop in next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nic Kuzmochka. I'm a gay dude living in the city of St. John's. I'm from Ottawa originally. I came here to do my degree in sociology, which I completed, and now I'm working in equity, diversity, and inclusion. What really brought me to kink was definitely personal interest and also an academic interest. I started reading about it. It was a big part of my honors thesis, looking at the ways that we think about sexuality and the way that sex is a core part of identity. So really my interest in kink is talking about it openly as part of gay culture, as part of sexual liberation, and really to be sex positive, to be open, because I think the like Ask was saying, the more that these things aren't talked about and aren't recognized, the more ignorance there is about them, and the more that contributes to stigma, and the more that also risks people getting hurt when they engage in these kinds of activities without having the knowledge that that's really important to be a part of it. So I'm really, really happy to be here.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. Wendy?
My name is Wendy Bonbons. I am a performance artist, primarily a burlesque artist. I have been lucky enough to have kink and BDSM bring some wonderful people into my life. I've had some wonderful experiences, but it's really, having that as part of my life has really helped me grow. So what kind of drew me to this event today and having this conversation was sharing that with other people. And, just like everybody else has already mentioned, the more that is spoken about and the more that's put out there about it, hopefully there'll be more education, exposure, and the right kind of exposure for people to explore things safely and get some positive interest.
Nice. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks so much for being here today, everybody. I'm super pumped. I'm really looking forward to this. Okay, so let's get started. I want to know doesn't matter who, you can jump in for, or anybody can jump in first, but I want to know in your opinion, what are some common misconceptions about kink? What do people think that really is not that true? What are the common things that are happening? Doesn't matter who, anybody.
I can go first.
Yeah.
I think a big misconception is the first one that came into my mind was who falls into what roles and what those roles really mean. The first thing that comes to mind is typically, what people think about people who are more submissive and the dynamics that would come with a submissive and dominant relationship. I've heard a lot of people assume who don't have the right exposure, who don't have any knowledge, that the person who is in the sub position has no power at all. And that's really not the case. That is definitely not the case. That's where the communication comes into play. And when you are the person who's exposing yourself and making yourself vulnerable, that comes with a lot of power and empowerment in its own. And when that's done in a healthy way, that dynamic, it can be a really beautiful thing, and not necessarily what you hear about or what you see about shown in maybe movies or TV shows and such like that.
Nice. Nic or Ask, did you want to weigh in on this one?
I want to talk about abuse. So I'm going to put my hand on my head while I'm talking about it. You can mute the audio, and then when I take my hand down, I'm done talking about abuse. So the common misconception that I run into is that all of BDSM is abusive and everyone has trauma and they're traumatized. So this is why they're doing it. And just other mean things, it's weird and gross and it's always unsafe, those kinds of things. But even in what we call total power exchange, where a person, and it can be 24/7, where a person wants to always submit to someone or some people. It's not there's not real codependency necessarily, or an actual loss of the ability to choose, because beforehand, the independent people choose that arrangement. And I'm so nervous. I'm sweating right now.
No, it's okay. It's so fun. Good.
And yeah, basically in kink, the arrangements you do, you can talk about your needs, and that's what makes it different from abuse. Because in abuse, I feel it's very silencing. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks for that. Nic?
I think a really common misconception is that people who engage in kink and BDSM are these people with these insanely high sex drives, and that we're, very hard to satiate, kind of if it's not 3,000 volts to the nipples, what's going on? And that's not the case. People in kink are diverse, all people who have sex. And the reality is that, some people do it with lots of partners. Some people only do it with one partner. Some people will do it all across their lives. Some people will try it a couple of times and like it. Some people will try everything, and some people will not try a lot. So really that both when you're looking to enter the kink community or any of those things, or you're seeing if you are kinky, it really is just about what you enjoy and what you find gives you pleasure. It's not about any sort of a sexual history or any of these boxes that we can fit sexuality into.
Yeah. I super appreciate that. I'm wondering, you mentioned the kink, I'm going to air quote, community. How do you, if anybody feels comfortable, how do you find the community or how do you find community? How do you meet other people who are interested in kink? I know of a website, FetLife, that is pretty fairly common. And I know that there's lots of forums and subgroups and the community in Newfoundland, I know, is actually quite large and worldwide too. I think a lot of people actually kind of forget that the community is huge. I'm just wondering anybody, if you wanted to speak about how has your experience been finding community in kink?
For me, it's been mostly online, because like even my work, it starts online. Like I post an ad online and then people contact me.
Okay.
But in Newfoundland in particular, right now I'm in a Discord group, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in kink and like wants to connect with people in Newfoundland specifically. You do need like a FetLife account usually, and then you like look up this group, and then like you talk to Emma who runs it, and then Emma will like give you a link to the Discord. So that's a great way for Newfoundland in particular, but generally, for me personally, I put it on my dating profiles. So if people are interested, like this is something that I'm not gonna leave out of my relationships. So like they should know beforehand, like if they're not interested in this, like they don't need to waste their time.
Need not apply for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did anybody else want to weigh in on this one? You don't have to. It's totally okay.
I've had a bit of experience both online and in person, kind of both finding the kink community and finding my place in the kink community. Primarily, like I kind of started out exploring, you know, like FetLife, hopping on a website, just looking at the different groups and stuff. And I find, for me personally, it was really interesting because I didn't really know what I was into. I didn't really know what I was looking for. I was just kind of diving into this open space, which can be really overwhelming, I find, online, which is, I guess, where it can be really helpful to find maybe specific groups for locations, whatnot. I very much so dove into like any location, but where, as Ask mentioned, there are specific groups that you can go into if you want to meet people from Newfoundland. But from there, I kind of was able to explore events when I moved out of province. For example, when I went to Montreal, I was able to find in-person events that were happening there where I could go and meet people and kind of break the ice a little bit online with a bit of conversation, and kind of create a safe plan for myself to go and explore this event, maybe with a friend, or like create a safe ride home, stuff like that. But I know that's not really accessible right now, you know, in the times that we're in. So very much so, like things like this where you can read comments and see people, you know, maybe chatting about the event or sharing the event or reaching out. I found that was really helpful to kind of help bring into the community. If I saw another, for example, in my case, performer who was doing performances that kind of involved some influences of different fetishes that they had or different kink styles, communicating with them and seeing, you know, what their experience was. But of course, you have to make that step then of communicating, which is very important in the overall.
Yes, for sure. Nic, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think my experience was a little different. It wasn't nearly as much online. I just happened to meet some other queers who were kinky. And slowly their contacts became my contacts, their friends became my friends in the community. Like I very much kind of both like built a community for myself, like this tiny little bubble of a community inside a much bigger community. But also learned about things that way, right? Like really just person to person. So there's so many ways to become involved.
Yeah. I know, like for me, when I was when I was exploring, I know that FetLife was really a big part of that exploration. But I know, Wendy, what you're saying, that it can be really overwhelming, but it's such an oversaturation of information, and you know, like there's so much to unpack in there. It can be really overwhelming. So I'm curious, like from each of your perspective, what advice would you give to somebody who was maybe interested in wanting to start but didn't know where or how to even know what their interests are? Like what advice would you give?
Do you mind if I start?
Yeah, give her.
Do your research. I know, you know, porn is great and it's wonderful and it's fun and what they're doing is exciting. But you don't see all the pre-work that goes into it. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of prep work in terms of making sure that you're ready and it's what you want, but also just making sure that the experience is pleasurable, right? so doing research, Googling this stuff, really like looking into what the kink is, and not kind of just going straight into it, can really, really help in terms of giving you the highest chance of having a really positive experience your first time, which can sometimes, you know, characterize your whole experience with kink. So really, I say do your research.
Yeah. Ask or Wendy, did you have any thoughts? Any advice?
Going off what Nick's saying about research, it can be really fun. Like sometimes, like often I run into kinks I'm not familiar with, and then that opens like a whole new world of more things to research. And yeah, it's great. Something I would tell people who want to try is to try around other people. Like if someone is not involved, but you feel comfortable with them, then like if you're suddenly in danger, like if you want to try fire play, for example, and then like, I don't know, your hair catches on fire, and then the person who's not involved can like put a towel on you and like help you out, because, you know, like the panic reaction will happen if you realize you're in danger. So yes, around other people. And I'm also going to mention abuse. I'm going to do the hand thing again. When I take my hand down, I'm done talking about abuse. So research is also really important, because when you don't have all the facts, it's really easy to be taken advantage of by people who like speak with confidence and are like, this is how it is, but that might not necessarily be the truth. So when you know things for yourself, you have much more power, and it's much more safe.
Yeah, there is power in knowledge for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wendy, did you have any thoughts?
I 100% agree with, as everybody said, do your research. There's a lot you can learn from that, you know, from exposure to knowing what to be mindful of, to just being aware of very basic safety. You know, like if you're somebody who's seen really beautiful posts online of people doing rope play, you know, you want to know the safety side of that too. And that can be, honestly, that can be a lot of fun, and sharing that with somebody can be a lot of fun too. You know, not everybody likes to talk about the communication side of sex and the safety side of sex, but you don't really get to have these wonderful engagements and have them be as fulfilling as they can be without the work that goes into them on that front. So if you're going to look into exploring this world, also be prepared for that as well. That it's your responsibility to make sure, as everybody said, that you know what's out there.
Yeah, communication is key for sure. I saw that somebody put in the chat as well that aftercare is something that's not often talked about, but is super important to even know about. I'm wondering if anybody wanted to explain in your own words what you believe aftercare to be, or do you want to talk about it for a second?
Aftercare is what you need it to be, basically. Like, it depends on the person. Sometimes aftercare can mean like total alone time, like you don't want to be around people at all. But a lot of times it means like you need like to be brought back to reality for some people. Like there's subspace, for example, which is like a type of headspace that people might get into, where it's like you're out of touch with reality a bit, but it's enjoyable. And then the aftercare, I find, is like, it can be like taking a shower, just like cleaning up, like seeing the world around you again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Subspace would be very similar to like top drop, but on the other end of it, right? It's the psychological after effects of experiencing, you know, BDSM or kink, or even just like an output of energy of any kind, really. Like I think a lot of people kind of go through the motions in that way, but aftercare is really important to ensure that everybody is taken care of and understands their needs and understands what happened or that sort of thing, and make sure everybody is communicative and on the same page. Nick or Wendy, did you have any thoughts on aftercare? Anything you wanted to add?
I think an important aspect of aftercare is when you're in a situation where you've engaged in really specific dynamics between you and someone else. Aftercare is that period where you recontextualize that relationship, right? So someone goes from being your dominant back to being your equal. And that's an important thing to be able to do, because it doesn't just switch. It's important when you're maintaining that relationship with someone, whether it's, you know, a partner or someone that you're friends with, or just any sort of relationship that you have. The maintenance of that relationship is a big part of aftercare.
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend that. The other thing too is just to, like, aftercare can be a really great space for communication. It's a great space for talking about your experience, because sometimes in the experience, you know, maybe something happened that you weren't the biggest fan of and you don't want to happen again. Those are spaces where you can communicate with your partner, and you can not just contextualize the sexual experience you just had, but the experiences you're going to have later.
Really well said. Nice. Wendy, do you have any thoughts?
For aftercare, I think that, you know, as we mentioned, it's very different for everybody, very much so what you need. And it's not just for when you're sharing that experience with somebody else. There are very much so times when, I'll just speak in my own personal experience, very much so times when I've maybe done a public performance, you know, made myself in a very vulnerable place in a live stage when I don't really have that sort of escape in that moment. But aftercare for yourself when you're experiencing those moments is very important. Whether it be, as Ask mentioned, taking a shower, maybe you want to just sit down with your cat and just like reconnect with yourself. But the vulnerability is very important to experience, but it's also very important to make sure that you heal while you're experiencing that, and making sure that you're processing everything. And that can apply very much so if you're even going, again, not maybe so right now, but if you're going to like a munch, for example, to meet other people who are in the fetish community, in the kink community, sometimes you may need to reconnect with yourself when you're coming home for those things, or if you're speaking to people online about something, reconnecting with yourself afterwards. Aftercare is very important, not just sharing moments with other people, but sharing moments with yourself too.
Yeah, 100%. Other than aftercare and communication and research, what sort of strategies would you say are important or that you use to make sure that you're safe in practicing BDSM or just like safe for sex? What's important to you?
I can go first, I guess.
Yeah.
I find for me, it's very important to communicate my expectations and my needs up front. Again, conversations can be very hard to have with somebody sometimes for the first time, but the hardest conversations are usually the ones that are the most necessary to have in those situations. So making sure that you're setting yourself up for success in that way is something very safe to do. And in terms of expectations, you know, like if you expect to be able to have things stop at a certain point, which, you know, that's when you think about, say, safe words, or, you know, what would make you feel more comfortable. Those are the types of things that you want to talk about, what you want to be on the same page. So that's what I'd really suggest, and that's what I practice in mine.
Yeah. Nic or Ask?
I would definitely recommend that if you're going to use materials, so like if, for example, you're doing anything with rope, bring your own or inspect theirs. And that really links back to the research aspect, but it's just the best way to know that, you know, let's say you're using a dildo, like you want to know when you're engaging in play with someone else that that's something that you can take and that is pleasurable for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing your own or knowing what other people have and where your comfort levels are with those things, that's I think really, really important to engage in play that's safe and good. Also very much like we were saying, I think having conversations around setting rules.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like a safe word's not going to do you a ton of good if you're ball gagged. So what other like sorts of mechanisms do you have for revoking consent or giving signals or any of those things to engage with? And that's going to be different between every set of people.
Yeah.
So really like sit down, talk about those rules, work them out.
Going off what you were saying about rope, I saw someone in the chat talk about EMT scissors or any kind of rope cutting scissors that like has perhaps a blunt edge on one side so you don't cut people's skin. That's really important for rope play as well. Another thing is like every different thing has different elements to learn about. So with rope, nerve endings and like where nerves are exposed in your body and where rope shouldn't be cutting into them is important. If you're doing something like trampling, you need to know where organs are exposed, and where like you shouldn't be stepping too hard or hitting too hard. Yeah, so like learn as much as possible to make it safe.
Yeah. And I think without that learning and education, like it opens people up to harm and to actual trauma, and you know, and I'm going to offer a little trigger warning here, like it can be extremely harmful to people when folks don't have that education or that coming in with that knowledge and start to practice things without actually you know, without understanding that boundary with other people. Like it can be really harmful. I'm curious, and I already know the answer to this, but I want you to answer it and want somebody to answer it. Is kink always painful? And where does pain come into kink? And what does it mean when it's not painful? Is it still kink? Anybody can answer.
Not all kink is painful. Absolutely not. Kink is a really fluid definition. It's really kind of about sexual practices that are kind of on the fringe. So there are lots of things in kink that don't involve pain. Examples might be water sports, so things that use people's pee as like a sexual object. Like that's not, I mean, hopefully not painful for anyone. But it's still kink, and it's very much that. So I think kink has a particular intersection with pain. I think a lot of kink ends up being about some kind of pain and how it can be cathartic, whether that be through humiliation or domination or physical pain. But really, I think kink is the point where the line between pain and pleasure blends, and where you're able to extract pleasure, whether that's through the physical sensation or the way that you think about pain.
Super nuanced. I love that. Anybody else? Do you want to weigh in on this one?
I definitely agree with the fact that there's different kinds of pain, like emotional, psychological pain, and physical pain. To talk about physical pain for a moment, there's like the, you know, like the sharp kind of pain and like the dull throbbing kind of pain. And you need to be informed about pain in the context of what you're doing. So like a bruise, that kind of pain, like you can recover from that. But if you're doing something that might be more dangerous and could actually injure you, you need to know the warning signs for like maybe something's fractured. Again, maybe nerves are being pressed on when they shouldn't be, and then you can correct it and you can stay safe. So pain's an indicator. Good.
Wendy?
No, it definitely doesn't always have to be painful. I'm very much so personally somebody who enjoys the lesser side of the pain scale. So I find, at least the physical side, but I find very much so the vulnerability is like can be a very painful experience for people emotionally. So I guess it's all on your perception. But again, it's how you kind of approach it and how you want the experience to be for yourself, and then communicating that as you go. So for example, maybe somebody is starting out an experience or some play, and about like me, and they're expecting that they're not going to be interested in experiencing much pain. They happen to enjoy it and they want to experience more. That's again an opportunity for good communication, but it can really be whatever you want it to be. It's very much so your experience.
Yeah. I'm wondering, because you mentioned it a couple of times, what is it, and anybody else too, if you've engaged in a similar type of dynamic, you can also weigh in on this, but Wendy in particular, I'm wondering what it's like for you to perform in such a public, you know, like what is that space for you mentally, physically, like how do you feel when you're performing in that way, like with kink?
I guess it's kind of like almost like any typical role you step into where you give yourself a little bit of a different mindset for a little while. Maybe you're not necessarily the person that you wake up and roll out of bed and brush your teeth as in that moment. You are who you are creating for yourself, which can be the beautiful, powerful thing about playing different roles in kink dynamics, or having a kinky side of yourself. You get to explore different feelings. So very much so for me, if I'm performing and I'm doing something that would fall into a little bit more of a kink style performance, something a little more vulnerable. Normally I am exploring a part of myself that I don't roll out of bed as, which is kind of nice. And it's liberating to be able to share that with people who encourage it, which is kind of why I guess we all do stuff like this chat, because we want to expose people to something beautiful and see how happy people can be when they're doing these things, and how much growth can come from it, like immense growth from having empowerment, not just from within yourself, but from communities and safe spaces like that. And I guess that's been really, really fun.
That's awesome. Nic or Ask, did you have anything else you wanted to add to this one? How's it been for you to, you know, or feeling in that vulnerable space? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely on that. First, I just want to say, Wendy, that was like inspirational. I feel moved. Really? Thank you. But yeah, no, I definitely think that what you're talking about, having a clear division, sometimes, not for all play, but exactly, like really paying attention to your mental health and who you are in a given moment. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Kink is beautiful, and that it lets us explore parts of ourselves that, you know, maybe we wouldn't even want to be part of the person that rolls out of bed in the morning. But is still like a cool person. And that's so great and interesting, and thank you.
Ask, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, maybe like boundaries is something I find important. Like when I'm not working, I do have like some interest in exploring like more dominant roles. But when I am working, like I don't feel particularly comfortable putting on that persona. Like I'm always like too concerned about things, I guess, to like give people what they are looking for. So I'm like very clear about like what I can offer and what I don't offer. And like that helps me like keep my own self feeling good and like feeling safe.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know we've touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering from each of your perspective, what has engaging in kink, BDSM, fetish culture, or communities, what has that taught you about your own sexual health in your experiences? Doesn't matter.
I can go first.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I get a lot of STI testing because I do sex work. So I do it like usually every 3 months unless something happens, and then I'll do it more frequently. But if something does happen, I like will make sure to do it again about like 6 months down the road, because some things take a while to show up. And because like a lot of my kink nowadays is linked with my work, my sexual health is like those two like areas of my life are interlocked. And so both elements have taught me a lot about my sexual health, and I've had to learn a lot in order to make sure I'm healthy. Because like it's not a common topic. Like in high school, you know, it's like very limited information. So it's a lot of self-education and like going to things like these and learning from other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Wendy or Nic?
I've definitely learned that sexual health is really, really wrapped up in mental health. And so, I mean, for some people that's more intuitive than for others. But kink has really taught me about the way that it's important to be communicative with other people, the way that it's important to both have boundaries and in healthy ways to push those boundaries for yourself. Don't push other people's boundaries, please. But it's really taught me about how the way that I think about myself is tied to sex and how dynamic that is. So really, I think what it's taught me is communicate all the time. And not just with other people, make sure that you're checking in with yourself and you see where you're at.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Wendy?
I think it's taught, well, I guess it's mostly taught me to be open and vulnerable at the bottom line for anything. Just be myself and kind of see where that will take me. Because I found in experiences where I am bringing something other than my true self to the table, if I'm engaging with somebody else or doing play solo, it's not going to be as fulfilling, and I'm not going to be able to conquer any insecurities or anything that come up the same way, which has kind of helped me a lot in like other dynamics and other relations outside of the kink world. Being mindful of, like as was said, checking in with yourself, being mindful of what I'm feeling when I'm engaging with somebody. You know, maybe I'm feeling something and it might not be because of them, maybe it might be because of me, and whatever I'm feeling is valid, but explore that, and that's important. And when you're not bringing your true self to the table in that regard, you won't always be willing to explore that. You might shut yourself off, and that's part of the experience. That's part of pushing these boundaries and making yourself vulnerable, or setting the boundaries, and that's your vulnerability. And I guess that sexual health and having that healthy engagement with people has definitely helped me in dramatically in my everyday life, how I communicate with people and how I check in with myself and regard my own health, because you're important and you can't do anything without your body, right?
Yep. And I do find that, like you're saying, like I think that a lot of the knowledge that you gain from this type of experience applies itself to so many other aspects of your life. Like I found that from my experience, I learned more about like consent and boundaries and my own personal like limitations, and it just taught me so much about myself that I don't know that I ever would have got elsewhere. It is just a phenomenal learning experience, I have to say, for when it's done correctly, when it's done right, which I think is a really important distinction, is that there's a lot of folks who try to engage in this kind of behavior, but it ends up going wrong because of the lack of education or lack of access to information, which is why webinars like this are great, because it starts the conversation. From your perspective, I'm wondering, what do you think why do you think that kink or BDSM is so stigmatized? Why do you think that people view it as, you know, it obviously carries so much history in it, that sexual deviance and, you know, like fringe sexualities, but why is it, in your opinion, so stigmatized?
I think it's really about the way that we attach morality to sex. There is so much of it, from, you know, just the fact that to this day, you know, being called a slut is offensive, right? Like there's so much in our common language and our common conception of the world that ties sex and morality together. And in particular, defines most sex as non-moral. Sorry, this is a particularly interesting topic to my cat.
It's okay, Banana.
And so when we talk about like how stigmatized everything is and kink play is, it's because it sits on the outside of all of that. You can really see how that's the case when we look at the gay rights movement and sexual liberation, right? Like gay people were considered to be like fetishists and perverts, and that way of seeing sex was used to vilify a people. And so I think that this is the same thing, just in a completely different light, taking certain sexual acts, attaching a morality to them for the purpose of creating systems of evaluation, of being able to say this person's bad, this person's not moral.
Yeah.
Because of, you know, this very white Western Christian idea of sex is for babies, and I'm not popping out a baby anytime soon. So I think that's really where it comes from, and I think kink is really necessarily opposed to that and looking to subvert that.
Yeah. Wendy, you're asked. Do you have anything you want to add?
So something I find has happened like throughout history is when people find something to be odd, they'll like medicalize it and like try to fix it, you know? So with Nick's example of being gay and with trans people being treated as like their gender being a disorder, like these are all standards that are set by like a certain group of people who have power. And so like what's normal and what's not normal is like it can be used as a weapon.
Yeah.
And like fairly harmless things that like aren't mainstream and then like construed as like presented as harmful, you know, it like pulls people down and like gives other people more power basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Wendy?
Everything has been so well said. Oh my goodness. I think there's a lot of stigmatization around kinks and fetishes because people don't always have the means to understand something they've seen, or maybe they haven't been exposed in necessarily the right light. And by that, I mean, like maybe it might be a scene you see on a movie that, you know, your parent explains real quick and then hush, hush, that's bad, don't look. Or you know, just how how things are explained to you in school and in a sexual health class, or maybe it's the time you raised your hand to ask a question about that class and they said, no, that's not really normal, or like, I don't know, there's lots of examples, but I feel like not having the means to get that knowledge is definitely a huge factor that causes people to not understand and then have these misconceptions, and it leads people to have these negative views. Not everybody, but a lot of people will write something off that they don't understand. And if it's, you know, if it's not something they view as right, it just goes, push it aside. We can't have that. We can't discuss it. We can't bring light to it. Don't bring attention. It's not happening. But very much so, talking about it is what makes these things healthy and normal, because they are healthy and normal. It's the way that people treat them that causes a lot of issues. And I think that's it's kind of a weird vicious cycle in that regard, is the lack of exposure and talking about things and knowledge. And it's the fact that we have to like do a lot of the work ourselves to get that knowledge.
Yeah. What do you wish that people knew? What would you say to somebody if somebody was staring at you and saying kink is bad? What do you wish that somebody knew?
That it feels good.
Yeah.
But really,
Fair.
like getting at that, you know, the saying goes, don't yuck my yum.
Yes.
Don't like tell me that something is bad when I say that I like it. You know, that's definitely happened to me. Having situations where, you know, you ask if someone's into something and they're like, no, that's disgusting. And often it taints the whole way that they see you. They're like, no, like I'm not even interested in you anymore. And it's like, maybe I'm down for vanilla sex. Why are you making assumptions about me? You know, maybe I'm not, but you know, there are all of these assumptions built into kink about grossness, and it's just it is the way that people talk about it is gross. And so the thing that I really wish that people would understand is that the way that we experience pleasure is different from person to person. and it's not, you don't get to go and put your opinions on everyone else.
Yeah, don't yuck your yum. I love that. It's actually, I actually really love that saying in particular. I've heard it like food shaming other people. Like if somebody's like having lunch and they heat up fish in the cafeteria and everyone's like, ugh, you know, I think it's so great. Like it's a really, really, I don't know, I just really enjoy that, that phrase. Wendy or Ask, did you have anything you wish that somebody knew?
I guess the empowerment. Like I can't even put into words what being involved and exploring this part of yourself can do for people, and what I've seen it do for people, what I've like felt it do for myself, and having that empowerment and feeling confident in that part of yourself can change a lot of things drastically for you. And it's kind of, I guess it's, for me, I view it as putting yourself out there, and like the amount of things that you can learn from being a part of a team on a soccer team, the amount of things you can learn from just I know it sounds weird, but the amount of things you can learn from putting yourself out there and trying something that interests you, like nothing's gonna feel perfect right away. It's you gotta learn how to take the baby steps and work into that for yourself. And I wish people could know. I wish I had a way to put that into like a small little, like, here you go, you don't like it, read this little fortune cookie, this says it all. But yeah, I wish people knew that side, the like the really powerful side that's not just the physical power.
Yeah. Ask.
I think I wish people knew how diverse it can be and is. Like, you know, as long as there's consent and like the people involved are consenting, and you're not involving people who don't want to be involved, and you're not like hurting people by dehumanizing them when they don't want to be dehumanized. Like, there's so many things you can do. You can have fetishes for anything. You could have a fetish for a water bottle. Like, you can do anything. Like, whatever you like is cool.
Actually read a study, or I didn't actually read it myself, but I was told about a study, I shouldn't say I read it, about rats wearing leather jackets. I don't know if anybody else has ever heard about this, but it was, okay, I might honestly not do this justice, but essentially there was a study done about rats with teeny tiny leather jackets, oh Charlie, yes, and that they were proven to, oh God, what was it, that they enjoyed the copulation more when they were wearing the leather jackets, I think because it was like a source of power for them. But honestly, I don't know if I'm doing this good or not, but I really thought it was very cute. So Charlie, have you read it, or do you know what it is? Are you?
Oh, but I was looking it up. I had to pop, once I heard that, I had to pop in because I've seen so many pictures of the rats with the leather jackets on years ago. And it is the cutest thing ever. But also, yeah, like I'm pretty sure that was the study, was the fact that like the rats felt more, I don't want to say like dominant, but more like interested in,
they engaged in it more often or something. I don't know. Yeah.
And rats are crazy to begin with. I love them, absolutely love them. But that concept is just so interesting to me.
Yeah, it was like proven that essentially that it was a fetish for them, or like a sexual interest, was that with the leather jackets it became more enjoyable. I think how I would describe it. So you never know. Anybody who's listening, if you do have questions, like feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm wondering, Charlie, Yohei, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask the speakers?
Yeah, the only thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, and it might have been something that Jen, you were going to bring up before I popped in after the rat conversation.
Oh, it's fine.
But I'm always interested in talking about things that people classify as being a fetish, but aren't really a fetish. So like, not the sense of like saying like the water bottle or food play or anything like that, but when people start fetishizing like race, like I know in the queer culture and the queer community, and you know, particularly on Grindr, we see a lot of things like no fats, no femmes, no Asians, which is awful thing. So like, I just want to get everyone's take when it comes to stuff like that. Like, why are people fetishizing people over like, you know, leather? Like, I love leather, but I would never classify being interested in someone as like, that's my fetish. So I'm just like wondering like everyone's interpretation of like, where do we as a society think like that's where it's gone for some people?
I would like to, oh, sorry, Nick.
Oh, no, that's okay. would you like to?
Sure. I just wanted to add a little bit of my own experience. So being an Asian gay man, I receive a lot of messages on Grindr, online, wherever, starting from, oh, I wanted to fuck a Japanese in my life. I get that a lot, and I receive a lot of requests, people watching Japanese porn and asking, do you do this? Are you this and that? And even once I was told, do you realize you're the fetishism everyone? That's when I was living in Mexico because there are not many Asian people. And I feel very confused. I feel I'm like, in a way, they are liking me because I'm Asian, but I also feel like I'm a sex toy, sex doll. So this question is really, has to do with my personal life a lot. So I'm really interested in hearing you.
Yeah, no, those are great things. And I think, Yohei, you hit it like nail on the head when you talk about feeling like a sex doll. Fetishizing a person kind of removes that humanity from them. You're treating them like an object. You're treating them like leather. And you're doing it, what's most important is that you're doing it without their consent. So when we go into kink and fetish play, when you treat someone like that, like an object, it's always because they specifically want to be treated that way. And when people come in and they do that and they fetishize people for their race or certain attributes of their body, they're doing that without that person's consent. They're doing that without actively engaging with them. And I think it comes from a very racist place. I think it comes very much from, you know, a lot of the struggles that Asian women faced in the same vein. And I think, and that Black Canadians and Americans face. And I think it comes from all of those places, and it's really terrible. It's a way that racism itself reduces personhood, and this is another exercise of that.
Yeah. Ask her, Wendy. Yeah.
The leather was a really good example. Like when we think of leather, you know, we can like attach certain qualities to it, like its smell, its texture, the density maybe, and like that's valid. Like leather's an object, objects have qualities, but like to be human, in my perspective, is to be different. Like no two people are alike. So when you take like a shared element of a person and like reduce their entire existence to that one element, like it's a bad feeling. And I get the Grindr thing because I've put myself as trans on Grindr, and I'll get messages being like, oh, you're exactly everything that I'm seeking, like trans, Asian, short, or something like that. I'm like, you know, I got way more things. I got a cat. I like to play video games. Like, what about all these other parts of me?
Yeah. Wendy?
Yeah, I very much so. It takes reduces somebody to everything that you expect them to be for that one aspect. Like for example, if you see somebody doing something in a play scene in a moment, they're not always falling into that role all the time. You know, somebody isn't always going to live up to what you expect that to be, and that's where the education comes in. And I think that there's a lot of lack of knowledge and a lot of want for that knowledge and the responsibility that comes with that knowledge and engaging with the lifestyles of kink and fetish, and then taking that and reducing it into something that it's not. And it's terrible. And having conversations like this hopefully will educate people a little bit more, share the conversation.
I think it comes back to like even how we identify as like a queer community, calling it like, you know, the community. I think what it does is when we rely on like fetishized stereotype tropes of people, then we're essentially like grouping all of these people into one gigantic monolith of a community. Like you're saying all Asian men are this, or all, you know, like in it, what it does is it is racist. One, Nick, it is very racist. But it's also just really harmful in general too, aside from being racist, because what you're doing is you're erasing personhood, just like you said. Like that is literally what it's doing. And it is so harmful. It can be really, really super damaging. But I think at the same time, it's important to remember that, like, for some people, like I know Ask, you mentioned earlier that for some people, engaging in kink can be a way to work through trauma and gain power. That for some people, that say an Asian man wanted to rely on that trope, wanted to be that for somebody, that can be power too. That can be powerful for somebody to work through if they choose, with consent, you know. But that's the most important line, is that you can choose to engage in that and rely and be that for somebody, and it can be power. But if you're not choosing that, then somebody else is reducing you to, you know, it strips personhood. I think that's a really super important distinction. I want to thank everybody for unpacking that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really glad we were able to talk about that, because that was one of those, you know, the harder, we're kink, we're talking about the action of, like, you know, enjoyment, pain, pleasure, consent. But then when you look at the fetishizing of a human, or, you know, the dehumanizing, like just kind of taking them down to that action versus then them as a whole. I didn't want us to kind of overmiss or skip over the idea of like the harder or that more, you know, systemic problem when we're talking about racism.
Yeah, I did want to note as well that like that comes from the same place as like a lot of white people saying that like it's just their preference that they don't like men of color. Mm-hmm. Like, sorry, I see it all in the gay community, so I just always assume it's men.
It's women too.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And so like that comes from the same place. Just instead of making someone your sexual object, you're like you're still not seeing them as a person. Yeah. You're like completely removing them from something rather than fixating on them. But it's the same dynamic at play.
Totally.
Okay, well, I know we're over time. And these kind of 1 hour long conversations really could be much more than an hour. I know, like, for yourselves, you've had years of talking about this with other individuals and experiencing it. So us trying to finite it into an hour for people to understand was never going to be the end goal. So our goal basically is for everyone to take away something from these talks, keep the talks going, leave our kitchen table and basically continue them at your own with your friends. But I would love to thank all of the speakers for coming and giving us your insight and your experience and talking about these topics that, you know, like many have mentioned, are not discussed in classrooms. They are discussed in, you know, friendly conversations or having experiences of your own, but kind of shattering that wall a bit and saying, you know, we should be talking about this more openly. We should be having this in discussions in schools and talking about, like, what does consent look like for kink? What is kink? What is fetishing? What is not an okay fetish, when we're trying to classify it as a human is not, or a race and a human is not a fetish. Leather can be, and it's wonderful. But also thank you to our lovely ASL interpreters for being here. We really appreciate having these as inclusive as possible. Sadly, our closed captioning might not be the best at all times, but we're hoping that, you know, like it's well enough that people can get the idea. I know there's sometimes it likes to change words around because it tries to pick up, but it's really not that fast. And of course, thank you, Jude, for coming and doing our land acknowledgement. And thank you for everyone who's been attending this. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed it and have taken something away. And I know we've talked about it already in our discussion around the fact that the word sexual liberation was brought up a few times. And just to let everyone know, we actually have our next episode on February 27th, which is all about sexual liberation. So sex in media, sex in our porn, sex work, and more. So we're going to be talking more about what does sexual liberation look like for our community. So with that being said, you're all free to go. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you at our next one.
Thank you,
Have a good night,
everyone.
everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.